Welcome to the Audiobook Lovin Podcast, discussing all things audiobooks with the authors that write the stories and the narrators that perform them, including a special series with narrator Shane East. The Audiobook Lovin Podcast is brought to you by Viviana, Enchantress of Books.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 5 of the Audiobook Lovin Podcast. My guest today is author Kennedy Ryan. Welcome to the Audiobook Lovin Podcast, Kennedy. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
I am thrilled to have you and be able to talk to you and get to know you better and have our listeners do that as well. Why don't we start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been writing, and how you got started?
Well, I write romance with kind of strong, usually kind of like strong elements of women's fiction. I focus a lot on the woman's journey in my books, but of course in the context of usually a pretty epic love story that often spans years and years and years because I really enjoy that. I've been writing, people always say I've been writing all my life. I really have been, it feels like my background is journalism, and I my first job was at our city newspaper when I was like 17 years old. I was still in high school. So I started writing editorials when I was in high school for our newspaper, and then went on journalism school and focused in PR and writing, for nonprofit organizations, technical writing, ghost writing, things like that. And then I'm really passionate about autism. I'm an autism mom, and I started writing a lot around autism and autism advocacy and like Chicken Soup for the Soul, autism parenting, things like that. And it wasn't until maybe about 6 years ago, I think about 6 years ago, if I'm doing the math right, that I actually started writing romance, even though I've been a romance reader, since I was like 12. So for a very long time. But yeah, that's me. So, and I'm really excited to talk about all things romance today. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you. What was the earliest experience where you learned that language, like the written word, has power?
That has power?
Yeah, like what you write and, impacts others, and that storytelling or that, sharing of the information. You've been writing for a while.
Yeah, I have. I've always known that, like in the sense that even how I started writing, my first love was poetry. Mm-hmm. And I started writing poetry when I was really young, before it wasn't technically anything technically sound, it was just kind of feelings. But I had always thought that my father is a very disciplined man, reserved. He is dean of students and a president of university. So he's very much, and very much academician kind of person. And so I'd always seen him as that kind of person. And I came across some poems in our garage, and I asked my mom, they were just these incredibly passionate poems, not even passion like love passion, but it was about social justice. And it was from the 70s. And it was just all this activism poetry. And I was like, who wrote this? And my mom was like, your father. And it was completely so different than how I saw him. And there was just something about all of that passion on the page from my dad that made me really want to tap into writing. My father always really encouraged language in our house. He used to have me read the dictionary. And so he would literally assign me like C, and I would have to read I just read words, and he'd come home and he'd quiz me and we'd have like these battles. We would go back and forth on C words until one of us stumped the other. That was kind of like our game, which sounds really nerdy and weird. And I'm hearing that in my ears, and I realize that sounds nerdy and weird. But so my father used to tell me, when you're reading, anytime you come across a word that you don't know, write it down and get the definition. And then within a week, make sure that you're using that word in a sentence, in a conversation. And so he really sowed in me this real love for language. And I think when I So I've always had a real attachment to language. Writing is very important to me. For me, it's not good enough. Just a good story is not enough for me as a reader. It can't just be that you're a good storyteller. It's the way the story is told. It's the language that's used. And it makes me a pretty finicky reader, actually. And so that's always been really important to me. I think when I first started really seeing emotional power in language is, I mentioned that I'm an autism mom.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started writing for, parent magazines, and I was a contributor for a while to Modern Mom magazine and just different mom, publications, writing about autism, I saw when I shared my experiences as an autism mom and as an autism family, the kind of response that it evoked and the kind of connection, especially from other families who were going through some of those similar things, or who'd had similar experience, or felt like I articulated something in an article that they had been feeling but couldn't put words to, or this sense of being seen and identifying with something that was being written that maybe they hadn't seen themselves in before. And I think that was a real predecessor for how I approach fiction, because one of the things that's really, really important to me in fiction is representation, is identity, is making sure that what I'm writing is resonating with people emotionally, that they see themselves in my work. That different people who may have been on the periphery of kind of mainstream fiction, mainstream romance, get the chance to see themselves in story, and get to see themselves getting a happily ever after. Especially marginalized groups is one thing that I write around a lot, because for so long, I'm a Black woman. And when I was growing up, when I was reading romance, I didn't see myself a lot in romance. I didn't see girls who looked like me getting these happily ever afters. And so I think there's real power in being seen. I think there's a lot of power in identifying with personhood, and who you're seeing on the written page get to be happy and get to have joy and get to be at the center of the story. And so that's something that's really important to me, and something that is, I think, kind of a hallmark of my work.
It's definitely something that when I talk to fellow readers and listeners and your name comes up, it's definitely something that is automatically brought up, is your the diversity in your books, and how you also talk about some difficult topics,
right?
And
right,
that sometimes we're going, okay, this is going to be a deep read. I need a glass of wine,
or a bottle,
or even we may have to put it away for right now until we're in a better mood, but it's going to get to it. But that also says that there is that emotional connection to the work.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, people say, oh my God, that was so hot, or oh my God, that was so emotional. And you read and you're going, it was?
Right. Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. And I do get that a lot. Like, I do get people who, I've gotten it really ever since I started writing fiction, but I have this one book that I wrote called Long Shot. And it was kind of the first book that I had written that I got all these messages from readers who said they had to stop reading. They would have to stop and then start back. And their Apple Watch would tell them to breathe because they were holding their breath. I mean, there's a real, it's some of my stories are very difficult, and I do recognize that. And I'm usually pretty careful about trying to make sure that people know content warnings and things like that, so that they can decide if those stories are too intense for them, because I know that some of my stories are, and I like to make sure readers know that. So, but for people who, if it's something that they do get into, I hope that even though it's some of the topics are difficult, that it's worth it. And I don't just write hard books. I think I have a reputation somehow that I just write these really, really hard books, and it's gonna be, you'll sob through the whole thing. It's still a romance, and there's still a guaranteed happily ever after. It's just usually the road to it is pretty intense.
Yes, the ride.
Right, it's definitely a ride usually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. It provides some variety in the book world, as far as what kind of books that we want to listen to or read, whether it's a rom-com or something a little bit more deeper, or if it's a contemporary or a paranormal.
Right.
So it's just, there's something for everybody, which is one of the reasons why I love this community.
Same.
So where do your ideas come from? How do you get those for your stories?
A lot of my stories, it can be a lot of different things, but a lot of my stories I like to write. There's a certain nowness about a lot of my work, meaning there's a certain, it's very current usually. Like I mentioned Long Shot. When I wrote Long Shot, it was, I don't know if people remember, there was this football player who had knocked out his girlfriend, then his girlfriend, now his wife, in an elevator and dragged her out of the elevator. And when I saw that, and there was this cultural dialogue around domestic abuse, and her story kind of got lost and people weren't sure how to feel about her. And I immediately thought, which doesn't seem like it would be the normal response, I immediately thought, I'm going to write a romance about, and not that the hero is the abuser, but just a woman's journey to liberating herself from a situation like that and then finding joy, healing, and then finding joy, so that was something that very current that inspired me. I was looking at the DAPL protest, with the pipeline protest in the Dakotas, and that inspired me to write The Kingmaker and The Rebel King, which I'm pretty sure this is the only meet cute I've ever heard about that happens at a pipeline protest.
Oh.
But yep. So and it deals with issues of climate change, and the heroine is Native American. She's Yavapai Apache, and she is a water protector. And so lots of research. I did lots of research about young Indigenous people who are on the forefront of activism in protecting Native land, and all of these things. These are the kinds of things that interest me. And so a lot of times, even with Queen Move, which is my most recent release, looking at the Crown Act and how there is, this is just one aspect of the book, but how there is discrimination based on natural hairstyles. One of the Gabrielle Union just won a lawsuit against, I can't remember Simon Cowell's show. So Think You Got Talent, I think.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that one. So
yeah.
She had filed, a lawsuit, and part of that lawsuit was based on their responses to how she wore her natural hair as a Black woman. And so I integrated the Crown Act, which is legislation that is supposed to protect people of color who wear their natural hair, and the discrimination that many of us experience in the workplace because of hairstyle, which seems ridiculous. But I point these out as examples of, I am interested in what's going on right now. I'm interested in culture. I'm interested in the things that we're talking about, or things that I think we should be talking about more. I'm interested in writing about strong women. And I don't just mean like, they're impenetrable, but how the vulnerability of strong women. I've written a book about a woman who was a sports agent, how women who are aspirational thrive in male-dominated industries. So these are the kinds of things that interest me. So when you ask, where do my ideas come from? They come from whatever's going on in culture. They come from whatever I'm seeing on the news, I'm seeing on blogs, I'm hearing people talk about. Those things that capture my attention, I usually like to integrate them into love stories. And so, those are for the most, and sometimes it can just be, something I see, it could be something else, but what I've noticed is it could just be, ooh, what if I wrote a story about, but that's usually not the case. Usually something makes me curious, something drives me to start researching. And as I start researching, I'm like, wow, this DAPL protest thing is really cool. But what if we added kissing? What if they started loving each other? Anything that's going on in the world, I'm always like, but what if they fell in love?
Gosh. Yep.
So that's kind of how everything becomes a romance for me.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it's one of those that we kind of look for that escapism as we're reading the romance, but it's also, sometimes we find a favorite recipe because the author
Right.
includes a recipe, or there's a playlist, or there's a
Oh,
song,
always.
and
Music
things
is a
like
huge part of my creative process.
yeah.
Huge part of my creative process. I don't even write. I don't start writing until I usually have about 40 songs on a playlist. I have a musical background, and so music is so important to me. So soul feeding for me. The book that I'm going to put out in April. I have 60 songs in that playlist, and I have not written one word yet. I mean, it's part of my research. Music makes me feel a certain way. And often, literally, certain scenes grow out of just how a song is making me feel. So, yeah.
So how do you search for those songs? Because I'm thinking, I know how it's happened in the reverse, where you've written a book and you're going, oh, that scene where that volcano and this and that, and then there's a song that matches it, that perfect. So how does it go in your direction where you haven't written anything yet?
First of all, even when I haven't actually, my process, I have so many friends who are like, oh, I wrote 2,500 words today. Yay. I can just sit down and write a book. Why can't you just sit down and write a book? And that's really not my creative process. If you are hearing the kinds of things that I write about, they usually require, my journalism background probably feeds this. I do a lot of interviews. I usually do like Zoom interviews. I record interviews. Then I go back and listen to the interviews of people, especially if it's something that's outside of my lived experience. And so I am listening to whatever it is, I have just like you're doing now, you have your questions prepared, and the interview goes in different directions, and I go back and listen to those. But usually the books that I write tend to require a good deal of research. And so I can't just sit down and start writing because I don't usually know. I have to learn. There's usually a lot that I have to learn before I can start writing. So in that kind of learning period, I have an idea, of course, about where the story is going. I generally know what's going to happen. Honestly, the interviews and the research shape a lot of my plot. So I have a general idea of there's these two characters who I know they're going to end up together. What is the thing that's keeping them apart? What is kind of the context in which they fall in love? And there's usually, for me, there's some, I don't want to say message because that sounds after school special, but there's usually something that's compelling me to write, something that I want people to talk more about, or I want to shine more light on. I mentioned in The Kingmaker and the Rebel King, it's a duet. I mentioned that, they're talking about protecting native lands, and he is a climate activist who is, all about creating sustainable energy industries. And then it also involves missing and murdered Indigenous women. Like, that's such a huge thing that's not getting enough coverage. As I started, I didn't even really know much about that, but as I started researching and interviewing Native women, I interviewed probably about a good, 13 Native women, a few specifically from the Yavapai Apache tribe. As I started interviewing them in preparation for writing these characters and writing this story, that was something that rose to the surface in every conversation, was their concern for the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And that's because the rates are alarmingly high for Native women here in the U.S., also in Canada. But so that was never going to be a part of the book. But as I started interviewing them, it was coming up in every conversation, and I realized this was something that was so present for this community. I needed to touch on it. All that to say, so when I'm in that phase of interviewing and research, that could literally be 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Depending on the scope of the story, I could be not writing anything for 2 months. That's just conducting interviews and doing research. In that space of time, the story is taking shape in my head. So I generally know what's going on. Believe it or not, I'm not going out like, here's a song. Oh, I need to get this song. I need to get this song. This sounds really creepy, I know, but I feel like the songs find me. Mm-hmm. I already know that sounds ridiculous.
No. I totally get that. That's why I was asking, because I was curious. I totally get that.
I do. I feel like the songs find me, and I'm watching television. I don't listen to the radio very much, but I might have on the radio, and I always have my, what is it? The app. It's not Zoom. It is Shazam. I always have my Shazam ready, and I'm like, what is this song? Because it makes me feel a certain way. And the song doesn't even have to lyrically connect with the plot or anything. It sometimes does. but it's sometimes how it makes me feel. And I will know this is the song. Like there was a song I listened to the other day. It came on. Literally, it had nothing to do with what I was writing. But when I listened to it, I could see the first time these characters make love. Like I could see it in my head as I was listening to that song. So I add the song to the playlist, and I know it doesn't have any lyrical connection, but it is the feel of it. You know, it's like the heartbeat. These songs kind of start to be the soundtrack for me as I'm writing, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else. And so there's one book that I'm working on now, but I've been working on this book for 5 years, you know, meaning not actively working on the book. I've had the idea for 5 years. And so as soon as I have the idea, I create the playlist. And so I'm literally just over the course of all these years, collecting songs as I go. And so this is a different book than the one I was talking about before. I have 80 songs on that list. I have written maybe 50 pages now, but those, you know what I mean? It's like that, it becomes entrenched. It's not this thing where it's like, oh, I'm on deadline, so I need to create a playlist. It's, oh, I know this is a story that I'm going to tell at some point in my life. And so I'm going to create a playlist, and every time a song I hear somewhere comes on or I encounter it, I'm going to add it to this playlist. And it just starts building, if that makes sense. So it's not like, hey, I need to have a Cardi B song. Oh, I need to add a Taylor Swift song. Oh, you know, it's not like that. It's like we kind of find the songs, and I kind of find each other through the process. You know, it's not as deliberate as that, but it's really, really vital for me. It sounds real woo-doo-doo-doo.
No. I love that. I think that sometimes we try to put everything in specific rows, in specific boxes to fit what we think needs to happen, whether it's the plot or our schedules and things like that. And so when we can find that liberty and just be in the moment, and that's when something happens, whether the song that's playing in the grocery store or, you know, you're going through your Twitter feed and someone's saying, I love this song. And you go, oh,
absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, let me listen to that.
Yeah. Or like me, sometimes I'm on YouTube and I'm going, what's that?
Right. And sometimes people will know, it depends on what I'm writing. Sometimes I'm really, really close to the chest with what I'm writing. Like the book that I'm writing now, I really haven't told people very much about it. It's on Goodreads, but it's literally like, hey, I'm writing this book. It's coming out in April. Add it if you want. You know, I don't have any detail. And sometimes I'll have like all this detail. And so sometimes people in my reader group, like my readers will say, oh, I heard you're writing this kind of book. I heard this. And they know, you know, those who follow me closely know what a huge part music is in my process. And they know that I create, so because once the book publishes, I include the playlist with the book. And so they know, you know, readers tell me all the time, oh my gosh, I'm cleaning up and I'm listening to your playlist, or I'm at work and I'm listening to the Grip playlist, or I'm listening to the Long Shot playlist or whatever. So my readers know how vital music is to me. And sometimes they'll message me and say, oh my gosh, I just heard this song and I know that you're writing this book. Would this song be good for you? And sometimes they are, you know, sometimes I'm like, wow, I hadn't heard that. I'm adding that to the playlist. And they feel so great because they're like, oh, that's mine. You know, when they get the playlist, they're like, I told her about that one.
Yes.
So.
Oh yeah. No, we love it as listeners and fans. We love it when we can help or suggest something. And it's just those little things that make us so happy. Like when you guys retweet us or you like a post on social media. You're like, oh my God, Kennedy liked it.
And you know, it's so amazing because I have, I'm very, very active in my reader group, like on Facebook in my reader group. I'm probably get on their nerves because I'm posting it like 3 times a day, and I'm really, really active in there. And occasionally somebody they'll say something and I respond and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you replied. And I'm like, really? You're in my group. We're talking. We're having a great time. Of course I'm going to reply. But it's that reader group. My reader group is like such a safe space for me because those are readers. I mean, it's a lot of readers. And, you know, when you have these larger groups, you don't know everybody, obviously, because it's like 8,000 people or whatever. And there's some who come to the surface all the time. And it's like, a small group of people who you see all the time. But I will, when I'm writing writing outside of like my lived experience and I'm like, hey, anybody in here? I mean, literally something like, hey, I need to interview some people who have had lupus. Message me if you've had lupus, in my reader group. And I can't even respond to all of the messages I get. And those become people I interview, as I'm preparing for the book. And it's really, really, really cool to see. And some of those become beta readers. My beta readers change with each book, depending on, I have a core group of alpha readers who read everything I write, but the beta readers are kind of interchangeable based on what the book is. When I was writing about domestic abuse, I was focused on beta readers who had experienced that, survivors. When I was writing about this woman who was Native American who had a very specific experience, I wanted those beta readers who would be able to inform that experience and check me for accuracy, which is really, really important because I'm a Black woman writing a Native American woman. If you're writing beyond your own experience, but beyond the ethnic group that you are a part of, you need to make sure that you're being accurate and you're being responsible with representation for that group, so that's all. And I do that, often. So that's really, really important to me.
I think it is also for the listeners and the readers.
Yeah.
There's many times where, whether it's a description of a city or, mispronunciation, if it's an audiobook of a name, and people get perturbed about that.
Well, and
but you can only imagine,
story.
If it was more on the back, like, this is my culture, this is my background, this is who I grew up around,
Yes. And I've seen a lot. I have been on that end of something, as like I mentioned, I'm a Black woman and I've seen books, people who weren't Black, to use my specific situation, who completely misrepresented something or said something in a way that was insulting or stereotypical. Mm-hmm. And when you ask them about it, they are dismissive. Oh. Like, you're overreacting. Oh. And so for me, because I've been on that other end of it as someone from a marginalized group who sees my group misrepresented, stereotyped, pigeonholed, insulted, demeaned, even if it was inadvertent, it was involuntary, it was out of ignorance. And then to be dismissed like you're overreacting. That's for me why I'm so careful, especially when I'm writing beyond my own ethnic experience, that I am making sure that I'm consulting people who do have lived that experience and, can check me and make sure that it's accurate. Some people call them beta readers or sensitivity readers. I've heard accuracy readers, which I like a lot. I like accuracy.
I like that.
Because it's like, if you're going to represent an experience that you haven't lived, you better be accurate. You better be responsible. You should be respectful. So. Yes.
Well, if you're going to do the research on how do you, the different dices, because you happen to be writing a chef and with mise en place and this and that. And if it's a smaller red dice, it should be the same amount of level, if not more, obviously, when it comes down to, heritage and culture and race and all that stuff, because it's important. And I know that I have to come across some of those things too, because from a Latina perspective, every time someone talks about a character that's, from South or Central America, they're automatically Mexican, for example, and they have the thick Mexican accent and the andale. And, and I'm like, not all of us are Mexican,
right?
Or the opposite, that they're first generation American, or, they've been here since they were 2.
Right.
They have to have an accent. And I go, born and raised here, I don't have an accent.
Right.
So not everybody, so it's like, I know that you can't make everybody happy, but I don't like that kind of stereotype of these different cultures. And we're such a melting pot.
Right.
In many different things, from the languages to the culture to the heritage. And so that's definitely one of the things that has stood out for me regarding your books. Is that level of research, but also the conversations that come of it, because your books are about romance, but you're also dealing with several different layers that's, culture, difficult topics, the grip series, racism and interracial relationships. Yeah. You said long shot with the domestic violence. Why is this? It seems like it's really important to you, but specifically, is there why?
Right. It's so funny because people ask me that all the time. They're like, why? Why do you have to? It's so funny because I kind of do have to, in the sense that I write what I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And
Yep.
I love reading books that are just, it's just kisses and it's hot and it's whatever and there's a little tension or whatever. I love that. Of course I do. But for me, when I'm writing, I need more than that. I don't know how else to say it except that for me as a writer, that's not enough. I need more. I need to be talking about something real, something that, and I used to question it, like, why does everything have to be such a big deal, Kennedy? Like, why can't you just sit down and write the swoon and write the sex and just get on with it? And, I took a course called Write Better Faster, which is by Becca Syme. And she also, there's an aspect of that course that's Strengths Finder. And it basically talks about all your different strengths and how those strengths play into how you are as a writer. And so, you go through the course and then you have this one-on-one with her where she walks through the different ones. And she said, you have something unusual in your strengths pattern that I don't actually see in a lot of writers. And of course, I'm curious immediately, what is that? And she was like, belief is really, really high for you. And she said, basically what that means is you have to feel compelled. You have to believe in what you're writing. And she said, and she was like, this is interesting, on some level, every time you sit down to write a book, you want to change the world. And it's so true. It may not be like, I'm going to literally change the world with this book, but I want there to be a shift in perspective. Something moves, when you read this book, something inside of you moves. It could just be moves further in the same direction you were already feeling. It could be moves you in a completely different direction. It could be that it, opened up a whole new perspective that you never considered. It could be polishing your lens so that you're seeing things more clearly, but something moves, and that's what it is she's like, every time you sit down to write a book, you want something to change. And that comes from one of my highest strengths, which is belief. And so I've stopped fighting that. I've stopped trying to be like anybody. I don't compare myself. First of all, I don't compare my books to other people's books. I don't compare myself to other people as writers. I don't do that. I think one of my favorite quotes, I quote this all the time. Iyanla Vanzant says that comparison is an act of violence against the self. And for me, I embrace that wholeheartedly. If we're talking about marketing and what's selling books and things like that, I'm looking all over the place. But if we're talking about the actual text, if we're talking about the actual story, I don't care what anybody else is writing. I don't think, wow, who's going to read this? That's not how. I don't write to market, which it's fine if you do, but I don't think what's big right now, stepbrothers are so hot right now, I'm going to write me a stepbrother. Like, that's not how I approach story. Anybody who looks at my books should be able to tell that, but that fundamentally is not how I reach story. Story for me comes from inside, what I'm passionate about, what I'm curious about, what to me needs light, what I would like to see more discussion about. And I see romance as a platform, for that to happen. All the things that make me curious, that compel me, that I'm passionate about, that I feel like need more light. All of those things can happen in the context of an epic love story. And it's hot, it's not like the love story is like, it's
fade
closed door, faded black. No, I mean, they're like getting it,
Yeah.
But, also, we're talking about, things that are really, really real. I like real life in my romance. It's not escapism, because of course there's sighing, there's swooning, there's fantasy, there's all of that. But at the core, there's going to be something very real. And that's just how I'm made, as a writer. And I don't see myself changing,
No, that's it. It's great. I think sometimes those things with the trends or trying to make sure that we sell more books,
which is
totally fine.
Totally fine. I think writing is so personal. I think that you have to write around what is important to you and what drives you. It's so personal. If you try to write based on somebody else's metric, you know, you end up dissatisfied or not doing your best work. So it's just really understanding that.
Or speaking your own truth.
Right. Absolutely.
Because I think that's the other thing too. It's one of the reasons the romance, a lot of the listeners and readers love the genre, is that it provides the ability to discover new things, whether it's, you know, I didn't know that I might be into kink.
Right.
Or I want to go horseback riding, and now I do. And research that one.
Right.
You know, horseback riding, or wanting to see if that red door is in Paris based on that one book, the way that it was.
Right.
But you're also providing that you can heal. You can get out of a difficult situation, and you can move forward and have a fantastic life, and you can heal. And I think that's also too where we resonate from a woman's perspective, that we are strong, we are smart, we can do this, we can leave the asshole. And
absolutely. There's definitely strong feminist you know, strains in everything I write. Everything I write, but not like, I think sometimes even with feminism, we try to box women in to what a feminist is even, you know, like you have to be this thing, you have to do this. You're not a stay-at-home mom. You're not this. Like, I really want to, in my work, explode all of that, because feminism is basically about choice, like your choice, being able to choose what your path. And if your path is a stay-at-home mom, you know, who raises your children and does amazing things, that's amazing. You're still a feminist, you know, go for it. I hate it when, and really it's culture that tries to put us into these little boxes and these little pigeonholes and try to squeeze us into their idea of who we should be. And that's one thing that's really important to me in my work, is exploding those notions of culture informing womanhood. You know, culture telling us who we are as women and who we are as feminist or as womanist, but that we can be self-defining, and we can thrive based on what's important to us and what that journey looks like, what that journey of figuring out what's most important to you as a woman looks like, you know?
No, yes. Thank you for that. I think that even if we don't have someone giving us that pep talk when we pick up these books, we're going, yes,
and that's, you know, that's the great thing about romance, is sometimes I feel like I know romance gets the shaft, man, you know, where, you know, people deride it, but it is the genre that centers women. It is the genre that centers our pleasure, that centers our agency, that centers our choice, that is for the most part, we are telling our own stories. It's not a man interpreting us. It's us interpreting ourselves. We're translating our own desires, and we are at the very center, and we are at the end happy. You know, so to me, it's the most empowering genre there is. So for it to be derided so often in mainstream culture is disheartening, but not unexpected, because we are in the patriarchy. You know, we are in the patriarchy.
Yes.
You know, so it's like anything that shows women being powerful and self-determining and sexual and comfortable with their sexuality, somehow the patriarchy is going to say that thing is bad. That thing isn't as good as all these other things.
Yeah, and demean it and try to make us feel bad about reading it, and that we're not smart enough to, you know, read other things, and so we're going to read this. And I'm going, you have no idea the things I learned.
You have no idea. Yeah, because reading is also about enjoying something, you know, you know? And so I think our stories are so, I mean, there's so many incredible writers in this genre who people could easily dismiss their gift because they're writing romance. And I'm like, you obviously haven't read a Sierra Simone, because if you have read Sierra Simone, you would know her brain is like a national treasure. So, you know what I'm saying? It's wow, you obviously haven't read someone like that, or you would not be able to turn up your nose.
Or even just the emotion sometimes the stories evoke.
Right.
You know, whether it's the being accepted for who you are and being that, you know, kooky girl that everybody thinks cute and no one loves. Or that the woman that wants to open up the bakery because that's her passion. And everybody says no. It's again, the empowerment and the ability to showcase that we can do whatever the fuck we want.
Right.
You know?
And I mean, it's such a broad palette. Like when you're describing those women that in all of these romances, somebody is seeing themselves. You know what I mean? It's like somebody is seeing themselves, no matter what the subgenre or what the storyline, like it's reflecting someone's reality in the context of a love story with a happily ever after, which is, in and of itself, amazing.
Yes, it's always like that little nice bow at the end, and like, yes,
Mm-hmm.
it's possible. What is it about the contemporary genre of romance that you love so much? Because all your books are in this contemporary world.
They are. I think it goes back in a way to what we were talking about earlier, where there's a certain urgency to what I'm interested in. It's something that is happening right now. It's something that I am either really passionate about, sometimes indignant about, sometimes just really joyful about, but it's usually something that's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
I say that, but the book that I'm working on next has a historical component. Which I'm really, really excited about and I'm not writing an historical. As soon as I start talking about these books, so many of my friends message me, "Are you writing an historical?" And I'm like, "No, that's how rumors get started." And somebody messaged me, "Oh my gosh, Kennedy, you're writing an historical." I'm not, but there is an historical component to what I'm working on now that harkens back to the Harlem Renaissance, into the Jazz Age, into the Roaring 20s, the early 30s. And so that's really, really exciting for me, though very intimidating, but exciting.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's like we were talking about before, those things that are happening right now, there's just this modernity to it. There's this urgency to it. There's this right nowness to it that I am very interested in. And it's so funny because my favorite subgenre is actually historical romance. That's my favorite subgenre is historical romance. But I'm so intimidated by historical, I just bow to the people who write it. And I have my favorite authors are, for the most part, historical romance authors. So
well, that's really cool. Well, that was going to be part of my next question about if there's a subgenre of romance that you haven't written yet but would like to. Historical, or is there something else?
I don't know that as much as I love historical, I don't feel super compelled to write it. The thing that I think I will probably venture more into is women's fiction. I think there's so many strong elements already. There's so many elements that are really, really strong in my work already that are women's fiction. I kind of straddle that line anyway. That is so funny because a lot of I don't read a lot of reviews because it's just sometimes not great for you.
Yeah.
Your self-esteem. So I don't read a lot of reviews, but I've come across a few where people have said things like, the thing, I remember this one pretty vividly. The thing that I don't like about Kennedy Ryan is that she writes women's fiction, disguises it as romance. And I was like, you know what? That's a valid thing. Like what you're saying, ma'am, is actually pretty valid. Not that that's what I'm consciously doing, but I know what she means. If you're used to reading romance that doesn't dig into some of these more difficult topics, that doesn't maybe focus on a difficult story arc for a woman from, kind of adversity to absolute joy and happily ever after, it can feel like, wow, this is women's fiction. I understand that. I think that actually there's a real blurring going on between what we're seeing right now in publishing is kind of a blurring of the lines between romance and women's fiction. If you look at a huge book this year, which is actually one of my top favorites of 2020, Beach Read, I think that that's an excellent example of a book that has such really strong elements of women's fic, but is also a romance. It has obviously a romance storyline, and has two characters who fall in love, and there's a happily ever after. So I think those lines get blurred, but that's what I've always said, is that it would probably be women's fiction. Even if it's women's fiction, though, love is in everything I write. Like I really am not interested in writing a story that doesn't have love in it. So it would still have a love story. But yeah, that's probably what I probably will do more of, is books that look like that.
Yeah, when we're talking about historical, and you went as far as back to the 1920s, because usually we think historical and we're thinking Victorian.
Right.
And then Karen White, who is writing as Karen Gray, did a book in the 80s, and that's technically considered historical.
Right.
And I'm going, in the 80s? Okay.
Yes. It's far enough back that it's a completely different era now.
It's like, oh,
it's
damn.
Archival.
Yes.
Because when you think about it, the 80s at this point was, okay, that was 40 years ago.
Yeah, it's about 40 years ago.
Hard to believe, man.
Yes, it does.
Gosh. Old, man, getting old.
Yeah. Oh, it's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Something I wanted to talk about that was really cool that happened recently to you was the Bookworm box subscription set.
Right.
So you were included and are now officially a pinmate.
I am a pinmate.
Yes. And the Kingmaker got an exclusive new cover.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little about that? Like, how do you feel about being a pinmate? And how's that whole process? Like, how did you get selected?
I've been in Bookworm. I've been in
yes.
First of all, I love Colleen and I love Bookworm Box. Like I love them because everything goes to charities that, to causes. This year, I think this one is, I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's basically around adoption. This particular box is around supporting an organization that advocates and assists with adoption. And I'm just going blank right now with the exact name, but I know it's around adoption advocacy. I love stuff like that anyway. I have Ginger Scott and I also we have an organization it's an initiative called Lift for Autism that raises money for families who have children with autism every April, which is Autism Awareness Month. So anything that's like around good causes, like those things compel me. And so I love being involved, first of all, in any way that I can. They reached out to me, and it's so funny that you mentioned the pinmate because this is going to seem so strange, but I've had so many people message me and say, oh my gosh, I finally have a Black pinmate. It's so funny. And they're like, a Black pinmate. And I just think that's the coolest thing, Yeah. I feel like I'm the first Black Barbie or something. So I had been in the Bookworm box before, but they weren't doing pinmates.
Right.
So now they're doing pinmates, and it's so funny because when they first did the doll, and Amy, who works with the Bookworm box, was like, "Okay, we're gonna redo your doll because there's something I don't even know what it was," but she was like, "We're gonna redo the doll," and I was like, "Okay." And I worked with Murphy, who does all of their covers, is Colleen's sister, on the cover, and I knew I wanted something. The original covers are black and gold, and I knew that I wanted something that kind of echoed the original cover, but it was so distinctly its own. And the thing about some of my books, like when you look at a series like the Hoop series that I have, it's all guys on the covers, like great looking guys, like long shot, block shot, hook shot. It's a man on the cover, gorgeous man on each cover. And that's really around marketing, selling books in indie romance, like looking at what sells. But the story itself doesn't really, I don't really write from that place, but I definitely market from the place of figuring out what's going to sell. But I kind of have to take off my writer hat where I'm going to write absolutely what I want and then put on my marketing hat and say, okay, now how am I going to sell it? But those stories are all women, there are these like strong women at the center of each story. And so I really see when I do these alternate covers, because I did another one we did an alternate cover of Long Shot for Hello Lovely, the Hello Lovely box. And I put a woman on that cover because I love seeing women on covers. And from a marketing perspective, it's for certain stories at different times, you do what maybe feels like it's going to sell the best. But I wanted to see women on, some of these alternative covers. And so I don't know, I just wanted something distinctive for anybody who hasn't seen it. It's like this black matte cover. And then it has, I don't even know how to describe the art that's on it, but it's in gold and it's more kind of impressionistic. It's a little abstract. That's the word I'm looking for. It's a little more abstract. So
it's very elegant.
It is very elegant. I loved it. And it's so, God bless Murphy. because I am notoriously fastidious about covers. Like everybody who works with me, every time it's time for us to do a new cover, everybody just groans and screams because they know I'm going to be so anal about it. No, I mean, really, like for the Kingmaker, the original Kingmaker cover, I did 2 photo shoots for that. Like we did the first one and I was like, no, it's not right. We need to do brand new models, brand new set, brand new everything. We did that. Then I was like, I think I kind of like the first one better.
But like, you would not have known that if you didn't do the second one.
Exactly. You see, you understand me.
I totally get it. You have to compare to something.
I do recognize I'm difficult when it comes to covers. I'm very, very picky. And so God bless Murphy, because she and I we went back and forth and we were looking for, the right images, and she would do exactly, I'm the kind of person who I'm like, okay, no, do this, and use this font and this is going to do it. And then you'll do it. And I'm like, it's still not working. You did exactly. You did exactly what I told you to. And it looks nothing like I thought it would. So we went back and forth like that a lot until we found this. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, this is it. And I love it. I really, really do love it. And I love them. Like I love their work. I'm so hating that because of COVID, damn COVID, that we can't have Book Bonanza this year, because it's like my favorite event every year. It feels like, I don't know if you've ever been, but it feels like a family reunion. It really does, like a book lovers family reunion.
Yeah, it's always been on my list to attend for the first time. Yeah, because I've done, originally at the RT Book Lovers Convention. A Polycon
this one
now.
They've only had it 2 years, and it's in Texas, and it's Colleen Hoover's, and it's huge. It's huge, but it just feels like a big old family reunion. And Colleen is just, I can't even articulate how much I admire her, as a woman and as an artist in this community, and as a philanthropist. She's like, she's Wonder Woman. I love her.
Mm-hmm. It's also great when we can get women helping women and help rise the tide and our
absolutely
boats, and get rid of the competition and that comparison, which I love that quote, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Borrow it.
I cling to it. That one's a Jan Levin, and she says, comparison is an act of violence against the self. Yeah. And I cling to that. My competition, there are 3 people in this race who I was yesterday, who I am today, and who I'm going to be. Like, that's the competition. Yeah. And I'm not looking at anybody else. God bless whatever anybody else is doing, but you're not my competition. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's why it's so easy for me to share covers and, put new releases in my newsletters and shout about other people's books and scream when I love, because competition, seeing other people as competition. Obviously we are all trying to succeed, but seeing other women as competition creates this artificial scarcity. Like there's not enough to go around, which is ridiculous because romance readers are so voracious. So many of them are reading 4, 5, 6 books a week. I can't keep them supplied.
No, yeah.
So there's more than enough to go around. So we should act like that by lifting each other up. Yes. And by, supporting each other and helping each other, not acting like too many people, I think something about the way culture or something shapes us, makes us think that for us to succeed, someone else has to have less. And that's a lie, and when we buy into that, that's what creates that sense of competition and artificial scarcity. And it's eroding and it's corrosive for goodwill in our community. So I don't buy into that.
Yeah, well, that's great, because I think sometimes too, as women, we are told that we always have to be better.
Right.
And we have to, be seen in a different way because there's so many of us. And and also we're competing against men and other things. And it's like, the girls, just chill. Like, come here. Right. I will straighten your crown before you go out there in public.
Absolutely. And the more you do that, like for some people at first, depending on our own insecurities or our own backgrounds or whatever, at first that feels so, so counter, counterintuitive, to like uplift other people. It feels counterintuitive, but the more you do it, the more it's like a muscle, the more you begin to work that of like really lifting other people up, encouraging other people, investing in other people, being kind to other people. It actually becomes something that you enjoy and look for ways to do, and it becomes second nature.
That's definitely part of me. I'm always constantly trying to help, or if I discover a new narrator and they're just starting off, I'm like,
right,
your website.
Right. And it's so funny you say that, because for this book that I have coming out, Queen Move, Ebony Flowers is the narrator, and I'm pretty sure this is her first one.
It is, like, at least from what I've read and from using that name, because I'm going to I always try to assume that the names are like pseudonyms too, just in case. So at least under that name, it is her first.
Right. Yeah.
I'm so excited for her.
I didn't realize that. Yeah. They sent me like different people to listen to. And as soon as I heard her, I was like, who's that chick? Because I had never seen her name like around in the community. Nope. And then as I started really digging, I saw that she's been on Broadway, and that she's been an actress, and she is an actress, and she's a singer, and she's all these amazing things. And I didn't even realize that. So I'm really, really excited for this book to be kind of her introduction to the romance community, because I think they're going to just fall in love with her.
Yeah. Well, talk about an introduction to the audiobook world. She's narrating a Kennedy Ryan book, and her co-narrator is Jacoby Diem.
Oh my gosh. Jacoby and I, we're like partners in crime, because he's done all of my grip books. He did Hookshot for me. So this is his 5th book that he's narrating for me, Queen Move. And I'm so excited, because I listened to other books because of Jacoby. I just finished, there's a new historical, it's not new, it's new to audio. It just came to audio.
Right?
Black, yes. Written by Joan Vassar. And I said, I'm just going to scream about this everywhere, because first of all, we already established that historical romance is my favorite subgenre. And there's a real, lack of, we have more of them now, but there's a real lack of, or has been a lack of, diversity in historical romance traditionally. And we have Beverly Jenkins, and now we have just different authors. Vanessa, oh gosh, I can't believe I just went completely blank on Vanessa's last name. That's bad. That's just because my brain is shut down. But we just had, and now Adriana Herrera is starting to write historical, but we haven't had that very much. And I love, love, love seeing, I'm literally Googling, because I don't want to mess up Vanessa's, oh yes, okay, Vanessa Riley. I don't know why. Vanessa and I are friends. I just completely went blank. But it
happens all the time.
Yes, I know. But it's A Duke, the Lady, and a Baby. So that's one of my faves for this year. So I wanted to make sure I got that right. So we've had Vanessa Riley. We have Piper Hughley. We have a few women of color who are writing historical romance, but it's not as many. And so when I came across Joan Vassar, hope I'm pronouncing her last name right, and I saw the Jacoby, and it's this. It's like a 4-book series.
She's writing the 5th book right now. Right. And the 2nd book's coming out
December 5th.
December.
Yeah, December 5th is when book 2, which I think is Elbert's book, is coming out on audio. And of course, Jacoby's narrating all of them. So, I'm a Jacoby fan, and he's such an amazing guy. I just did a box set for my grip series, and I did like some bonus stuff, and he did bonus audio for me, and I'm getting messages literally like every day from readers who are like, oh my gosh, Jacoby, reading those vows, so I shout hard. I stand for Jacoby hard. So he and Ebony doing this together is just, I can't wait for people to hear it. Queen Move is just, it's special to me. And I'm really, really glad that Ebony is going to get, some light. When I say some light, not like I'm all that, but just like that the romance community gets to meet her paired with someone as amazing as Jacoby. And I hope telling a great story. So,
yes. No, we definitely love on the ladies. And when they're with one of the narrators that we love, as the male narrator, we're going, oh girl, you so lucky. Not realizing sometimes that they're not even in the same room, but okay. But it's just that whole thing like, oh my God.
Right.
But yeah, Jacoby's fantastic. I had the opportunity to interview him earlier in the year around late May, early June for the Audiobook Lovin Series. And oh my God, that he was so excited about Black. That's how I learned about it. Was he's like, I can't tell you the name right now.
Really?
Yes, but he's like, I'll email it to you later. But I'm really excited about this series. And he was already, like sharing the love for the story. And then when it was starting to get announced and stuff, and he's like, remember that story? I'm like, yeah. And like, oh, here it is. I'm like, ooh, like, give me snippets so I can share it in your group. And he's been great about it. Yeah, he is such.
Yes.
And, he loves what he does, and he loves the authors and stuff like that, which is great to see too. That working together, the authors and the narrators, to bring this out for the listeners, and we can see it for both sides. Because we're like narrator motivated now, at least some people,
right?
And that is important.
Yes, I am a huge Jacoby fan, and he was definitely like at the top of my list for move. So I'm just so glad that he was able to do it.
Yeah, I was like, when are you announcing it? Because you already told me I need to share it with people.
I know.
What are you sharing? So I can share and say, oh my God.
Right. Yeah. I can't wait for people to hear it. I can't wait.
Well, according to Audible, and I say it that way because who knows nowadays with Audible as far as what is showing or not, it's saying that you currently, you have 13 titles in audio.
That sounds right.
I think so. I double checked. Right. But what made you decide to have your titles be in audio format?
Oh, audio's obviously exploding. It's the fastest growing sector of publishing. And so that was kind of when I first started, first of all, I started out, and we didn't really talk about this, and I don't know that it really matters, but I started out in traditional publishing. So I've kind of built my career as a self-published author, but my first 4 books were traditionally published through one of the big 5, one of the big 5 New York publishers, and they have never done audio for those books. And I'm always like, why don't you do audio for those books? Give them to me, I'll do audio. But so I didn't have any control over that. I had started loving audio, and I just bemoaned the fact that my books didn't have audio, and I had no control over that. And then when I started self-publishing, I definitely wanted to put my books in audio. So the first books I self-published were the Soul series, and I put those in audio pretty quickly. I didn't know very much. I did it through, I think, AC, and it was I didn't know anything really to try to make it a simultaneous release or anything like that. Wanted to get it in a format where my thing is always finding these pockets of readers that I could be overlooking. And I know that there is a group of readers who basically only listen. And I have become that reader. I will want to read a book so badly. And if it's not on audio yet, I just note when it's going to come out in audio, and I don't read it until it's available in audio. I am that person now.
Me too. Welcome to the club.
Right. And so many times my author friends will be like, oh, could you read an arc for me? And I'm like, do you have it in audio? And they're like,
it's an arc.
It's an arc. And I'm like, so are you saying no? Is that a no? And then it takes me forever to read it because I'm so in the mode now of audio as opposed to even ebook or paperback. So it was important to me from the beginning to do audio and to make sure that I had it for those readers who that's really the way they consume romance. I wanted to make sure I had that as an option. It is, as I've grown and as I have understood the importance and the significance and the growth of audio, it is now a part of my plan. Meaning, if I have a book coming out in April, which I do, I know I need to be finished this book at least a few months before, because I want the audio to come out with the paperback, with the ebook. That is, for me, audio is just as much a consideration as any other aspect now. And when I'm writing, I find myself thinking about how it's going to translate to audio. I don't need that he said. I don't need that she said. I don't need, I'm thinking now about how prose, because how my prose is going to translate to ears.
and there's a certain, because like I said, I started out in poetry, there's a certain cadence to a lot of what I write anyway. Like I think in a lot of ways, I think iambically. So when I'm writing, I'm like, I hear the meter of what I'm writing, even though it's not poetry. And I tune my ear to that kind of thing, even when I'm listening in audio. So I don't know, I just find myself adapting even as I'm writing to make sure that it's going to translate well for listeners. So audio has become really, really important to me. And I've started doing my own audio. I have a great relationship with audio publishers. Like I've worked with Tancher, Queen Move is through Blackstone, because Queen Move is through a small press. It wasn't self-published. But the Kingmaker, the Rebel King, those are things that I did myself. I love creative control. I love promotional control. I love control.
I got that about you.
Yes, I like control. And so doing my own audio was kind of another step in that progression. And I love it. I love being able to choose my own narrators and all of that. So,
well, casting, it's extremely important.
Very,
it can either make or break the book.
Absolutely.
And so I totally understand the need for the control in reference to that.
Right. Well, and now as you become, because at first I wasn't an audio person, and now I understand the wrong narrator can ruin a wonderful book. Because I'm like, I really think the story is great, but something about the narrator, I can't really get into this audiobook. And then the story itself, because that's how I consume my books, it becomes less accessible because the narrator isn't right for it. And so, and obviously we both know that there's a segment of listenership that follows the narrator even more than the author themselves.
Yes.
In some cases, like they're like, who the heck is Kennedy Ryan? I don't know, but I know Jacoby. Yes. Anything Jacoby does, I want to hear. Oh, it's by who? Kennedy who? Okay. And so it's really important to make sure that you're choosing the right narrator and the right voice, and then also somebody who someone who as much as you can has a presence in the community, has a connection to the audio community, because the audio community is a community within the romance reading community. Yes. And I love that. I love that. Yeah. Especially on Twitter. I get so many interactions with audio files on Twitter. Like that's where I see so much of my interaction with audio people.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do we're a lot on Twitter, and I think it's because it goes so fast, and we're also limited on how much we can rave about you all.
Right.
Based on character. So we're constantly, but it goes when it's a real quick note here and there, and also sharing information is really easy. Jacoby will post something, I can just grab it and retweet it and
retweet it.
Yep. Or when you've done something, you're like, you're going to want to get that and things like that. It's really interesting. But overall, the community as a whole, as a listener, there are narrator motivated. And if today they were to find out that, for an example, since I'll mention Jacoby again, I'm sure his ears are burning.
They should be.
Yes. If we were told that he's reading the Encyclopedia Britannica,
yes,
and the letter B,
I'm there.
We'll buy the entire set,
right?
Just to be able to get to the B, because that man narrated it.
Right. Absolutely. Agreed.
So that's where it's important, and I see that sometimes you guys as authors don't have that control of casting.
Yeah, and that's one thing. I have been fortunate to work with publishers who communicate and say these are choices, these are options. Who do you like? That kind of thing. So I've been fortunate to have a lot of choice. But like I said, I'm a control freak. Like when we talked about the covers and how exacting I am about branding and just all of that, I'm the same way about everything. So narrators too, but like I said, as an audiophile myself, I recognize how essential that is, how the voice can make or break a book. So on audio. So
yeah. Do you find yourself that do you cast a little bit in advance of the book, so you kind of have that, this is going to be, Jacoby or Jason Clark, and this is the cadence that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, when I was writing the Grip series, I had Jacoby in mind, for sure. and I had never heard him before. But then as I started like looking at who was out there, well, and I am really particular about making sure that if the character is a Black man, I want a Black man to be narrating. If it's even when for Blockshot, it was like we were talking about, for a first generation Mexican American woman, I wanted someone, but I wanted someone who was Latina, to be narrating. Those things are important to me. And it was harder when when I had a Native American heroine. That was harder because there aren't a lot of Native American narrators, but as much as I can, I try to have that reflection of identity between the narrator and the character as much as I can. And so Jacoby, as I started listening, I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy for grip for sure. And then when it was a no-brainer. When I was writing Hookshot, I knew, even as I was writing the character of Keenan, I could hear Jacoby as that character, as I was writing it. When I wrote The Kingmaker, I had started listening to, oh gosh, I hate that I'm going blank like this. Jason
Clark?
Yes, Jason Clark. That's my narrator for that book.
Yes.
And I loved his voice, and I was like, that's Maxim, and so we got him. And Joe Raylan, XC Sands,
yes.
She narrated for me with Longshot. She narrated for me with All the King's Men, so 2 books there. So I've worked with her a few times, and she's amazing. So certain people, you know what they do, and you start to kind of think, oh, this person might be great for that. I definitely want to work with Zachary Weber at some point, because I adore him. Like, I adore everything about him. So
yeah, no, he's great. So talented.
So talented. So he and I have chatted about working together on more than one occasion, and we're going to make it happen. For
yes. Sure. Awesome. He is I adore him too. He is so sweet and smart and so talented. Oh my God. Sometimes I always get surprised in a good way. Like he, increases that level of like, I knew you're good, but damn, now I know you're good.
Yeah, he's fantastic. He is fantastic.
I look forward to that.
Right.
Yep. Do you listen to the audiobooks that are yours, like when it comes down to like the audio proofing, or when they're completely done?
Oh yeah, I listen to them myself. I'm sure there are people who also, sometimes I'll send them into other people so that I get another set of ears, but I always listen to them myself. Yeah. And if I have any like, ooh, why do we do this? Or can we change this? Or can we adjust this? Then I'll do that.
So Kennedy, we're going to be sharing an exclusive audio teaser of The Queen Move, narrated by Jacoby and Evie. Yes. So can you take a minute and kind of set it up for us?
Yes. So this book, it is childhood friends to lovers. So Ezra and Kimba are the hero and the heroine, and they literally meet in the bathtub as babies. Like, their families live next door to each other or live across the street from each other. Both of their fathers are in law school and together. And the families just become really, really close. And so they are best friends from the time they are literally infants until they're like 13 years old. And something happens that separates, something happens between their families that separates their families, that splinters the friendship and the connection between their families. And I'm not going to go into all of that. But so that's not spoilerism, because the blurb literally tells you, it hints at that. So the prologue, which is what I'm not sure how much of it we're going to play, but the prologue is when they are adults. So they're in their 30s. I like to write mature characters. They're in their late 30s, and they haven't seen each other literally in like 20 years. And so it's at her father's funeral, and she hasn't seen Ezra since, they were about to go to high school, and he shows up at her father's funeral, and it's their first time seeing each other in a really long time. And that's all I'm going to say. But it's very complicated because, of course, they both have built these entire lives for themselves. For people who may have read The Kingmaker and The Rebel King, the All the King's Men duet, Kimba is actually the best friend band of the heroine Lennox from that duet. And they are like, if anybody loves or has watched Scandal, you know, kind of like, she's like an Olivia Pope type character. They're like white hat gladiators. They opened this firm that is a political consulting firm, like, you know, Olivia Pope. And they basically focus on putting people in power to champion their causes and to champion people whose beliefs align with theirs, making sure that those are the people that end up in power. And so Lennox's nickname becomes the Kingmaker. And Kimba they are partners in this firm. And so this is Kimba's story. And I had a great time writing this story. It's very me, you know, it's very diverse. The hero is Black and Jewish. And I had a great time just kind of digging into Jewish culture and bringing out what it looked like for a young boy in the 80s, because this takes place in the 80s in Georgia, being Black and Jewish and, you know, being in synagogues and negotiating kind of this dual identity in the context of Georgia in the 80s. And so that was really fascinating. And just getting to kind of play around with their second chance, because that's what it is. But it's a very multicultural cast, which is kind of typical for what I do, and lots of real issues. Like I mentioned before, one of the things that comes up, it's not like central, but it's something that was really important to this character, was the Crown Act. And, you know, I just like playing with real world issues. I like for when somebody's reading romance to kind of bump into, it's escapism, but they keep bumping into kind of the real world as they're going along. And this book is definitely like that. If you like Scandal, or if you watched Scandal and kind of that Olivia Pope kind of thing, then this world, because it is 3 books in this world, it's the All the King's Men duet, which is the Kingmaker and the Rebel King. That's one couple's duet. And then it's Kimba. Those 3 books are all in the same universe. And it's all kind of like this about power, politics. You know, if you like Scandal, it's a lot like that. So
thank you.
Yeah. Lots, very sexy, very, you know, cause people hear politics and they're like, bleh, you know, but it's not like that. Yeah. It's like saying Scandal is like politics.
Yeah,
you know,
I love that show. So it's a good comparison from that perspective to give me an idea better. Yeah. Well, so here's a clip.
Blackstone Publishing presents Queen Move by Kennedy Ryan. This book is read by Ebony Flowers and Jacoby Diem. Dedication. For all the girls who have to work twice as hard, you know who you are. Prologue. Kimba, 2 years before present. Is there anything sadder than a daddy's girl at her father's funeral? My mother's quiet sniffs a few seats down give me the answer. A grieving widow. He was a good man. Someone in the long line of mourners offering condolences whispers to her. Mama's head bobs with a tearful nod. In this day and age, she still wears a pillbox hat and veil. It's black and chic like Mama, channeling tragic Jackie Kennedy or Coretta Scott King. My father was not just a good man. He was a great man. And everyone should know he leaves behind a widow, grieving deeply, but ever fly. I squeeze the funeral program between my fingers, glaring at the printed words. Joseph Allen leaves behind a wife, Janetta, 3 children, Kayla, Keith, and Kimba, and 6 grandchildren. He leaves behind. Daddy's gone, and I don't know how to live in a world my father does not inhabit. The casket is draped with sweet-smelling flowers in the center of the funeral tent. When we leave the cemetery, he will be lowered into the ground with unfathomable finality, separated from us by white satin lining, 6 feet of dirt, and eternity. Kayla, my older sister, sobs softly at the end of our family's row. Her 4 children watch her carefully, probably unused to seeing their unshakable mother shaken and reduced to tears. Even I'd forgotten how she looks when she cries, like she's mad at the wetness streaking her cheeks, resentful of any sign of weakness. "It's not weak to cry," Daddy used to say. "It's human." "But doesn't the Bible say even the rocks will cry out?" I challenged him when I was young, loving that something from Sunday school took. "So maybe tears aren't just for humans." "You're getting too smart for your britches, little girl," he'd said. But the deep affection in his eyes when he kissed me told me he was pleased. He liked that I asked questions and taught me to never accept bullshit at face value. "I miss you, Daddy." Not even a week since his heart attack, and I already miss him so much. Humanity blurs my vision, wet and hot and stinging my eyes. I want this to be over. The flowers, the well-dressed mourners, the news cameras stationed at a distance they probably deem respectful. I just want to go to the house where my parents raised us, retreat to Daddy's study, and find the stash of cigars that only he and I knew about. "Don't tell your mother," he used to whisper conspiratorially. "This will be our little secret." Mama hated the smell of cigars in the house. True? Who would call me by that name? Now, when the only people who use it, my family, are all preoccupied with their own pain. A tall man stands in front of me, his thick, dark brows bunched with sympathy. I don't know him. I would remember a man like this, who stands strong like an oak tree. A well-tailored suit molds his powerful shoulders. Dark brown, not quite black hair is cut ruthlessly short, but hints at waves if given the chance to grow. His prominent nose makes itself known above the full, finely sculpted lips below. His eyes are shockingly vivid. So deep a blue, they're almost the color of African violets against skin like bronze bathed in sunlight. No, a man like him, you'd never forget. Something niggles at my memory, tugs at my senses. I'd never forget a man who looked like this, a man with eyes like that. But what about a boy? "Ezra?" I croak, disbelief and uncertainty mingling in the name I haven't uttered in years. It can't be. But it is. In place of the awkward boy I knew stands a man exuding self-assurance in the confident set of his shoulders, the proud bearing of his head. If adolescence was the rough draft, this finished product is a masterpiece of symmetry and beautifully sketched lines. He nods, a tiny smile relieving the sober line of his mouth. Yeah, it's me. Maybe it's the emotion, the vulnerability that shatters the guard I always lock in place. Maybe it's the compassion in his expression, or maybe it's finding, in the eyes of a stranger, the comfort of a long-lost friend. It could be all of these things, or maybe it's none of them. But I surge to my feet and fling myself into his arms. He doesn't seem as surprised as I am by this ungoverned physicality, his strength tightening around me right away. He's much taller than I am, much taller than the last time I saw him, and he dips a little closer to my ear. "I'm so sorry, Kimba," he says. He was one of the finest men I ever met. His words and arms warm places left frigid all week, and this moment melts into a million others I thought I'd lost forever. Ezra and me, tracing our names into wet concrete with sticks, riding our bikes through the streets, shouting and laughing at summer dusk, racing the sun, pumping our legs to...
So we hope you enjoyed the clip. If you have not read the book and we're waiting for the audio, it'll be coming out November 17th. And so almost here. Yeah. Well, I would ask you what you've been working on or what's coming up next, but you did share that already with us.
Yes.
And so that's awesome. And well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yep. And listeners, if you are not following Kennedy on social media, you should. All those links will be within the podcast, as well as the episode post at Viviana Enchantress of Books. And until next time, happy listenings.
A heartfelt thank you to all of our Audiobook Lovin Podcast Patreon. Special thanks to Michelle Sutton, Jing Kemp, Jen Franklin, Brittany Cottingham, Kimberly Reed, Leanne Schwartz, Christine Cox, Christy Reitz, Jennifer Graham, Cindy Pittman, Mendy Summer, Jenny Johnson, Jesse Stafford, Chrissy Font, Rhonda Pezzarello, Michelle DaCosta, Emily Dye, Michelle Bestard, Farah Blair, Candice Platel, Carol Liebner, Bethany Crane, and Teresa Martin. The Audiobook Lovin Podcast has special Patreon access levels. Join today to receive early access to podcast episodes, exclusive content with our guests, and much more. Support the podcast by becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/audiobooklovin. We thank you for your support.
Thank you for joining us on the Audiobook Lovin Podcast, hosted by Viviana, Enchantress of Books. For links and more information discussed in today's episode, previous podcasts, or the Audiobook Lovin Series, please visit our website, vivianaenchantressofbooks.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a positive review wherever you listen to our podcast. Until next time, happy listening.